Okay, folks, it's time for Cyberfrog 2 Rekt Panels, Part 2. In Part 1, we covered the first 5 or so pages of Rekt Planet. We're going to be covering another 10 pages in this particular presentation. And, of course, the comic book that we're looking at is Cyberfrog, Rekt Planet. That is Ethan Van Sciver's baby. He is a 30-year veteran of the comics industry, responsible for such artistic masterpieces as Green Lantern Rebirth, Flash Rebirth, a run with Grant Morrison on X-Men, and his own creation, Cyberfrog. Let's get into the story of Cyberfrog so far. This is going to be a quick recap of the events of Cyberfrog Blood Honey and the first few pages of Cyberfrog Rekt Planet. Cyberfrog, Trick Ron, and his brother Salamandroid, Daduron Ron, yes, that is Daduron Ron, as in Daduron Ron, Daduron Ron, are cyborgs built from the DNA of a tree frog and a salamander, respectively, and the template of their cybernetic starship mother, Chel-Sin, who is determined to thwart the invasion of Earth by the Vispas, a race of murder hornets. When the Vispas invade, Chel-Sin is captured, and, cut off from Chel-Sin's power to remotely augment his cybernetic weaponry, Cyberfrog is gravely injured. He spends the next 20 years healing from his wounds in suspended animation, and Salamandroid's fate is unknown. When Cyberfrog awakens, he is stunned to find the Vispas have conquered Earth. Using a signal from a tracking bead, he searches out his friend, Heather Swain, who has since married and mothered a child, Lily Owen. Mother and child live in a survivalist commune in the forest, safe from the Vispas, until now. Now, I want to bring up a couple of sound issues that were raised by Ethan Van Sciver's response to my Rekt Panels Part 1 presentation. First question, how do you pronounce Vispas? You can hear how I'm pronouncing it, but why am I pronouncing it that way? Well, first, I assume it's not Vispes, because that just sounds weird. But let's look also at what the soft Y rather than the hard Y sounds usually sound like. Words like sympathy, gymnasium, symbols, dysentery, and of course, krypton. All of these have an I sound, so Vispes should be pronounced Vispes, right? Well, no. According to Ethan Van Sciver, it's Vespes. Doesn't look like that, isn't written like that, but that's what it actually is. So that is how I will be saying it from now on. I will be saying Vespes. Now the other thing is, how does Cyberfrog's voice sound? And the reason I'm asking this is because when I started speaking in what I thought Cyberfrog's voice sounds like, Ethan Van Sciver's immediate reaction was, "Don't croak," because I was talking like this. But here's the thing, Ethan. He's a goddamn frog. He's gonna croak. He's literally croaked in the book. And I don't mean died, I mean literally croaked. Moreover, his speech patterns occasionally resemble a frog's croaking, like when he's asking Heather Swain for chicken. So yeah, I'm gonna be croaking this guy. Sorry, but that's just how I hear him. Now, I want to deal with some objections that were raised to Rekt Panels number 1 with regard to Alpha Core's panel layering by Joe Bennett. I called this a problem. I got pushback saying that this was a preference issue instead. But it is a problem, and I didn't do a very good job of explaining why. In fact, I was going to do an entire video just on panel layering, and how it should be done and how it should not be done. But I realized that most of those rules are like one-to-one with the rules for panel breaking. And I already put out a video on that. If you go look in my library, YouTube, BitChute, or Rumble, you can find my video, Erratic Rules for Panel Breaking. Panel breaking being when your character or some element of the foreground actually breaks out of the panel border, and it gives it that kind of 3D effect, a little bit more of a pop to it. But there are rules by which it ought to be applied. It's not something that you should just do at any given time, because anytime you do something that's non-standard for the reader, you are putting more pressure on the reader. You're making the reader expend a little bit more processing power to read your comic. So the less you use these things, the better, and you should only use them under certain conditions and in accordance with certain rules. And the 3 rules that I gathered from looking at Kerry Andrews' panel breaks in his comic Erratic, which I thought were acceptable panel breaks, and I had to figure out why, because I'd complained about panel breaking enough by that time that I had to say, okay, if I like these panel breaks, if I don't have a problem with them, then that must mean that there is some set of rules that these panel breaks are adhering to that I find that make them acceptable to me, as opposed to just flagrant uses of the panel breaking motif. And what I discovered is these 3 basic rules. Number 1, do it sparingly. Don't be panel breaking all over the place. And when I looked at Ethan Van Sciver's Cyberfrog, Bloodhoney, for example, there was like 50% of the pages had panel breaks on them, whereas Kerry Andrews did 3 panel breaks in like 40 pages. He made his panel breaks count, whereas it was just kind of like litter in Bloodhoney. Another thing is to realize that whatever breaks the panel borders becomes the most important thing on the page. If you have something breaking out of the panel border, that becomes a non-standard element, and the non-standard elements stand out more. And the last rule is whatever gets covered up by the panel breakage should be low information. Do not have a panel break or something that is breaking out of a panel into another panel cover up important stuff in that other panel. I actually saw an example of that in Cyberfrog Bloodhoney, where Cyberfrog begins talking about Chelsin's heart, quote unquote, that she gave to Heather Swain, and Heather Swain is using it to power her TV. And then in a later panel, Cyberfrog's head is doing a panel break right on top of Chelsin's heart. It's like, you're just taking the thing that he mentioned as something important and you're relegating it to no importance by putting his head like right over it. So you have to be careful when you're doing panel breakage. Now, these 3 rules correspond almost exactly with the same kind of principles that apply to panel layering. Panel layering is when you have one panel layered on top of another. Do it sparingly, same rule. You don't want to be panel layering all over the place. Next, whenever panels are layered, the top panels get priority of importance over the bottom panels. It is the panels you put on top that become the most important panels on the page. And then last, whatever gets covered up in a bottom layered panel by any top layered panel should be low information. In other words, don't cover up something important when you're layering your panels. I want to focus really hard on this second rule because you would not believe how often this rule gets violated. And an example of this comes in Alpha Core number 1. Now, this is the example I gave in my Rekt Panels Part 1 presentation. And I didn't do a very good job of explaining why it was that I thought that this layering needed to be gotten rid of and just the panel extended across so that you have just 2 regular panels. And the reason for this is that this boom and this splash are supposed to be simultaneous events. One is not supposed to precede the other. And the problem that Joe Bennett introduced by layering the panels is that he necessarily prioritized in importance the explosion of the splash in terms of time priority. I mean, not only is it right there on the page, one after the other, whereas you at least had an equalizing of priority of the 2 panels when they were in the flat simultaneous mode. Here we have a boom followed by a splash, and it drains that little bit of energy out of the scene, because if you have the boom and splash happening at the same time, that is much more of a sensory overload to the readers, which in a good way, because the idea is to overwhelm them in this moment. So this is how panel layering actually hurt this scene. Next, we had this scene in which Brian Solari is flying away, and there's an instance of panel breakage and an instance of panel layering on this scene. Panel breakage occurs with Brian Solari's elbow jutting down into panel 3. So panel break rules say that panel 1 gets priority. Brian Solari flying away is now the most important scene on the page. But you've also got panel layering of panels 2 and 3 over panel 1, which should mean that panels 2 and 3 get priority. And that means when it comes to panel 3, you've actually got this priority doom loop going on, where you're not exactly sure which of these is supposed to be the more important panel. Now, my solution to this was just to get rid of Brian Solari's elbow, and Ethan Van Sciver immediately recoiled at this, saying, no, you want to keep that pop in there. You want to keep the pretty, effect of his elbow being in the other panel. And my response to that is you got to focus on storytelling first and foremost, and not on just what looks prettiest. So, what is the best solution to this, though? I mean, my personal solution that I came up with in my Alpha Core #1 video that covered this page specifically actually made all of this a flat panel layout. There's no layering going on. There's no breaking going on. But I did realize that there actually is a place for panel breaking in this particular scene. And the reason is that, thematically speaking, Brian Solari is dominating Ingrid Valdez in this scene. He can fly, she can't, therefore she needs a ride where he doesn't. So this whole scene is kind of like a dig at her. And to have his elbow jutting down into the panel and kind of digging her in the ribs, like, see, I can fly and you can't, that actually makes thematic sense. And so I would approve of this particular panel break now that the panel layering has been removed, so that you don't get into that doom loop of priority. Now you have a clear priority of panel 1 over panel 3. So panel breaks, yes, they can actually be effective, and I'll show you later on in this presentation where Bloodhoney could benefit from one of those panel breaks. So one of the things, though, is that I really want to avoid are pages like this. Why? Because look at all of the freaking panel breaks and panel layerings. This page is spaghetti to read. I mean, you go around this page, around and around, trying to figure out what exactly is the order of importance here. What exactly am I supposed to be looking at? What is important? What is not? Thematically, what is the most important scene on the page? It's just a freaking jumble. And it might look pretty on the outside, but as far as telling the story, it's kind of a mess. And so I wind up sitting over here like Yoda saying, must unlearn what you have learned. Because somehow he's been encouraged to just go balls out and not show any kind of restraint when it comes to using either the panel breaking technique or the panel layering technique, and ultimately it ends up hurting the book. Now, we fight. This is where we're actually going to be covering the next 10 pages of Cyberfrog Rekt Planet, in which Cyberfrog is going to get into a fight with a Vespes. Now, it starts off where Heather Swain is asking him, is Salamandroid, with you? And Cyberfrog says, no, he... And then Lily interrupts saying, well, I'd love to stay and catch up, but... Okay, when he's interrupted, the last thing that's in the reader's mind, because the word he, is Salamandroid. And Salamandroid's presence is actually not important to the early parts of the book. So having Cyberfrog get interrupted while he's talking about Salamandroid is kind of jarring to the reader and leaves an image in the reader's mind of Salamandroid when really we need to be focusing just on this particular scene. So I would change that last word to no, and that way Cyberfrog is basically, starting from a position of I have no idea what happened to him, and so then when Lily interrupts, we're thinking about Cyberfrog rather than Salamandroid. So then Cyberfrog is trying to dissuade Lily from leaving. He says, works for me, stick around. No, I need to go. Bad idea. Worst idea of all time. And I'm wondering now, in this point of the conversation, where is Heather in this? Because Heather's just standing there, and I don't know if Lily was trying to sneak off and find her dad. I don't know if she has, Heather's permission to find her dad. Maybe this is something Lily does on the regular. I mean, we don't really know these characters all that well at this point in the story, so why is it that Heather's not putting up any kind of protest at all? You would think that she would at least say something like, Lily, like a little bit of exasperation, like, here's your kid acting out again. And so Lily says, my dad is lost. He's been missing for a year. He needs me to find him. And Cyberfrog tries to explain how things are to him. Lily, going out there alone and unarmed is insane. Now, why? Why is it insane to go out there alone and unarmed? Because what Lily has just told him back in Rekt Panels number 1 and the previous few pages is that she's never actually seen a Vespis. She's heard about them, she's heard the rules, but she's never actually seen one of the murder hornets for herself. She actually refers to them as kind of the unicorn of her existence. It's supposed to be out there, but she's never actually seen it. And so when Cyberfrog is explaining to her why it's a bad idea to go out there, he needs to make known to her that the Vespis are real. Going out alone is insane. So then he's at least telling her there is a reason why she should not go. Even though she doubts the existence of the Vespis, they're actually out there. So that needs a little bit of clarification. Now, on the next page, after Heather freaks out a little bit about the fact that Cyberfrog is offline, we are introduced to the character of Bob. And it's kind of funny because in the first panel here, I'm wondering if Bob is like, oh, at seeing Cyberfrog. I mean, because, giant frog. But it's actually the fact that he has been attacked and stung by a murder hornet that's the problem. But it's kind of funny because I think to myself, well, if I was a guy and I'm running for my life and all of a sudden I encounter this kind of monster as opposed to the monster that's just attacked me, isn't there going to be some sort of problem? But then again, I do know from Blood Honey that people who get stung automatically stop thinking rationally and they start having, like hallucinations, or they just lose brain function over a rapid piece of time. So I'm not really going to worry about the fact that he's kind of ignoring that his friend Heather is talking to a giant frog. So now Bob says, all y'all, get to the underground buses. They found us. The murder hornets are coming. I've been stung. Get to the... Okay, little too much information here. All of this information is kind of superfluous on top of the fact that the murder hornets are coming. That's really the most important thing that's being communicated here. Now, we will have an opportunity for Bob to reveal that he's been stung in a later panel, very, very soon. But for now, let's just get rid of all that dialogue. Now, Heather says, no, that can't be. We're safe here. Bob, stop running. You're panicking. You'll attract more of them. Okay, Heather, which is it? Are you in denial, or have you accepted that there are actually murder hornets around? Because in that first sentence, no, that can't be, we're safe here, she's basically stating that what Bob is saying cannot be true. There aren't any murder hornets around. Bob is hallucinating. Bob is panicking for no reason. He shouldn't be. This is ridiculous, Bob. What are you doing? But then all of a sudden she's like, oh, if you panic, you'll attract more of them? But she doesn't actually believe that there's any around. So what the heck is going on? Let's have Heather stay in denial. And instead of have her just say, Bob, stop running, you're panicking, have her say, Bob, obey the rules, which again will imprint the rules that Lily told Cyberfrog, again in the reader's mind. Stop panicking, and then get rid of that lower portion of the dialogue, because that's the part where she seems to accept that there's an actual Vespis around. Because right now, the reader can be in a state of uncertainty. He can say, well, I don't actually know that there are Vespis around. Maybe Bob is hallucinating. It keeps us in Heather's mind and Heather's point of view. Then we get into the scenes where Bob is blowing up, because yes, he actually has been stung, and here we go. But this is the point at which Bob can communicate to us that he's been stung. And all we have to do is just slightly modify the dialogue so that when Heather tells him, "Stop panicking," Bob says, "Can't, I'm stung." And then, kaboom, or rather, puff, right? What the hell is this supposed to be? Seriously, what is that sound effect? And because when I sound it out, I'm like, pop. It sounds like pop fart. I mean, really? This is supposed to be a scene of abject horror, and you've got a sound effect that's like pop fart? It sounds like a wet fart. I mean, it's just kind of juvenile. It doesn't sound right to fit the intensity and the horror of the panel. You know, don't even have a sound effect if you can't really capture it in something that won't sound silly. Yeah, I mean, this is not supposed to be a comedic scene. This is supposed to be something absolutely horrifying. Oh, by the way, I do want to mention, before we leave the page, that we've got some screwed up prioritizations going on here, too. Because what's the most important scene on the page? Well, the most important scene on the page is Bob exploding, right? It's Bob blowing up in front of them and showering them with gunk. That's the most important scene. But not according to the panel layering, because according to the panel layering, these are the most important scenes, because they're covering the scene where Bob explodes. Now, thankfully, they're not covering any high-information bits and pieces of Bob, but again, they're covering the panel, which means they get the priority. Oh, but wait! Look at the third panel. Bob's foot is jutting in to the third panel. So this is actually the highest priority panel on the page, because he is breaking into the panel that is layered on top of the bottom panel. This is ass backwards. If you're going to fix anything about this page, just do me the favor of getting Bob's foot off of himself. I mean, the page is like twice as good now as it was before, now that his foot is not stepping on himself. You've only got one level of prioritization reversal that really shouldn't be there, as opposed to two levels of it. Moving on. And now we fight. We're going to be covering the actual fight between Cyberfrog and the Vispas now, starting with the arrival of the Vispas, where the dialogue breaks across the panel for some godforsaken reason, even though the Vispas is now on the other side, so now it becomes a little bit confusing about where is that noise coming from. Don't bother breaking the panel. We don't need it. We can't understand what the Vispas is saying anyway. So now, Lily is pointing at the Vispas, which is the first one that she's ever seen, saying, "Mom." And now Cyberfrog goes into action, jumping up into the trees, saying just one of them. And Lily is down here in the corner saying, "Look." And I'm thinking, okay, I'm looking at Cyberfrog. I see what he's doing. But that's not actually what she's pointing at, is it? But it's hard to tell because she's so far away, it almost looks like her finger could be pointed upward at Cyberfrog. So what is she actually saying look at? Well, from the next panel, it becomes clear that she's still talking about the murder hornet who has just arrived. So I would not want her dialogue here to be distracting us from Cyberfrog, as if she's telling us to look off page, or telling Heather to look off scene, and Cyberfrog is really the key action in this. So I would just get rid of her dialogue balloon there. Because in the next one, she's going to be saying, "Mom," again, and we're good. Now, Cyberfrog has a bit of dialogue here that I think needs to go. It's "must have followed me back from Philly." I don't think he should communicate that, especially not out loud. Reason being is, imagine you've just found out that your friend from 20 years ago has brought danger to your daughter. That's not going to go over well, and I'd like to think he's smart enough to know that. So let's blank out that dialogue for now, because what we fill it with is going to depend on what we do with the next couple of pages. Because what I want to show is that in this case, we've got a couple of pages in sequence where Cyberfrog, after being up in the trees, is now directly attacking the Vespas and saying, "Don't worry about nothing. I got this." And then the next thing he does is kick the Vespas in the head. But what I want to point out is that I like to call this a money stealer. Because every time I see a page like this, I feel like I got fleeced a little. And the reason being is that this is a very pretty picture, but it's very, very, very low information. We already know Cyberfrog is about to get into a fight. Cyberfrog's getting into a fight is the only thing that this page is communicating to us. I mean, if you look at this 3-page sequence, you could actually eliminate the second page entirely and just have Cyberfrog go from his position in the trees to attack the Vespas outright. You don't need the middle page at all. In fact, you could take the dialogue from this and move it back into this blank space that we opened up, where Cyberfrog says, "Don't worry about nothing, I got this. Mom, stay calm, Lily, don't even breathe." And then he just goes right into action. "I don't need Chelsea to rapid evolve me, and I don't need Salamandroid's help." That whole splash page was just absolutely superfluous. But yes, it was pretty. So since some people like pretty pictures, let's go ahead and put it back in. We'll go ahead and clear out the dialogue here again, and let's reanalyze what we need to do here. Because when I look at this scene, and I see how devoid of information this is, you know what I'm reminded of? God, I wish I could see the look on Ethan's face when he sees this. I'm reminded of this panel. This is from ISOM number 1. It's a scene in which Avery Silman has been dropped out of the sky by Yaira, and he's going to crash on a taxi. It's a completely superfluous page. The previous page showed him falling, and now he's still falling, and then the next page he's going to crash right onto a taxi. So just like in the case of this Cyberfrog battle scene, this is an ISOM page that could have been thrown away. Now, what if, however, we were to go back to the style of the old comics and start loading these scenes up with information, a la Luke Cage, Hero for Hire back in the day? See, here's a scene where Luke Cage is falling, just like Avery Silman is falling, but he's got a lot to say, at least in his thoughts, on the way down. He's thinking all these things on the way down, and so we get to be entertained by what he is thinking all the way down. He's not just being quiet. And so what I want to do is apply this style to the Cyberfrog page so that I'm not freaking bored looking at this page. Because as pretty as it is, it doesn't tell me anything. I need it to tell me things. Like what things? Well, how about something like this? "My confidence masks my shame. I hopped 40 miles to get here and never looked behind me once. I let this Vispas follow me here." So here you have Cyberfrog's internal torment over the fact that he's gone all this way to find Heather and didn't even realize that the whole time he was putting her in danger. He was bringing mortal danger right to her doorstep. So now we've got something more than just, "Oh, here's the fight starting." Now we actually have a look into Cyberfrog's head and seeing, how he is being internally tortured by the fact of his carelessness. And now we can go back to this scene, and instead of having this dialogue, which would have actually revealed that outright, and say something like, "Let's try a little death from above." Because in saying that, now we focus on, okay, well, what is death from above? Well, it's this move that he's doing now. And so that's why the focus is now on the move, because he's just mentioned the move, and then we can flow right in to the next panel. Now, in that next panel, I kind of have a little bit of a problem understanding what's going on here, because you can see how in the previous panel, his leg is crunched up, and he's got his knee completely bent, practically, And now he's got his leg extended in a kick. But the force of the kick is from left to right. Why isn't the Vespas's head going from left to right in our view also? You would think that the Hornet's head would be following the force of the kick, and moreover, that would also get rid of this obnoxious panel breaking that we have here, because it pushed the head all the way over to the side so that there was no need for that. So that's, I feel like the physics are off in some way here. Then, when we get down to this middle panel, we have a lot of dialogue cramping our style in the middle. And it would be better if we did have two balloons of dialogue, but the second balloon should be behind Cyberfrog, and then just move the second dialogue balloon here, its contents, into the second balloon that's behind him, move the first balloon's contents into the second balloon, and then get rid of that dialogue balloon altogether. And that gives the art in the middle some more room to breathe. And then in these last couple of panels, we have the Vespas attacking Cyberfrog with its, well, you could call it jaws. They're called mandibles. And he's remarking, fast and loud. Watch that stinger, home skillet. Okay, two problems. One is he's telling us it's fast in a way that's kind of descriptive rather than reactive. It would be more fun to hear him react to the Vespas's speed than to just tell us outright that it's fast. And I don't even know what the thing about it being loud is. You know, I mean, is it hurting his ears? And moreover, he's saying, watch that stinger, but it's the one part of the Vespas he's not watching. He's actually dealing with the mandibles up front, trying to stop it from taking his head off. So that's what he should be addressing. So let's change that dialogue in the first scene to, whoa, watch the mandibles, home skillet. And now you've got something that more fits the scene. You'll put an eye out. Next, we have Cyberfrog taking the Vespas into the trees, and this is one of the rules, which is stay in the trees, because the Vespas lose their maneuverability in the trees, and this is something that Cyberfrog is now just learning. But there's, in the way that he says it, yeah, you don't like these trees all up in your beeswax, do you? There's almost like he already knows that, instead of he's learning that. And if you just change this word, yeah, to hey, you get more of a sense that this is something that he's discovered, as opposed to this is something he already knew or he was confident in, even as he's talking about it. This is something that he's learning, something that we're learning, and you know, it makes us go along the journey with him. So, hey, you don't like these trees up all in your beeswax, do you? Cramps your style, I can tell. No room to maneuver, no room for you to... And now we come to one of the more complicated scenes in the fight sequence. And this is one that I believe Ethan had to revise because Bill Willingham gave him some advice on it. Bill Willingham, of course, is the writer of Fables. If you've ever read that, you'll know just that the dude's like a freaking master. And one of the things that he told Ethan, if I'm recalling this correctly, is that when Lily has an outburst here, all of this captioning that we see on the page where it talks about suddenly Lily who's tried to stay calm, yada yada, all four of those caption boxes were previously not there. And Bill Willingham got confused and said, well, why is it that Lily screams? And Ethan told him, well, all of this pent-up fear and anxiety is just letting out. And Bill told him that, well, you have to let the readers know that. You have to let the readers be aware of what's going on in Lily's head in order for them to understand why it is that she's screaming. And so Ethan put a few captions in here, these 4 captions. And the problem with these 4 captions is that they are in a first-person omniscient tone. In other words, it's told from the perspective of, like, if Cyberfrog were stepping back into the narrator role that he had back in the first couple of pages of the prologue to Rekt Planet. But that voice has been gone ever since those 2 pages. Ever since then, he's been in the first-person immediate voice, which means he's right there in the moment. And so there's no way that Cyberfrog, being there in the moment, can know anything that he's saying at this point. So I would get rid of those captions. I don't think that was the proper way to handle the need to communicate that knowledge. Instead, what we can do is communicate it after the fact, instead of before the fact, which was the means used after Bill Willingham's advice. So what we're going to do first is we're going to take this little bit of dialogue where Heather says, "Lily, shush, now," and move it up to really where it needs to be, which is in the same panel with Lily freaking out. She goes, "Ah, Lily, shush." And here's a point where panel breaking actually does a good service to the sequence here, because if we take the dialogue and we move it across the panels, then it becomes distracting to the reader at the same time that the distraction occurs to Cyberfrog. So Cyberfrog and the reader find this distracting at the same time, which means the thematic use of the panel breakage is perfect for this particular scene. So Cyberfrog realizes, oh, what's going on? And then he gets stabbed, and then he needs to realize why that happened. But first, before that happens, we also have to address the fact that there was some panel layering going on that really didn't need to happen. We've got the most important scene, again, on the page is Cyberfrog getting stung. And so we should not have Lily screaming and Cyberfrog's distraction, which are preparatory steps to his getting stung, overshadowing the actual stinging. So I got rid of the panel layering there. Now Cyberfrog can talk about why it is that Lily called out. "Stupid, stupid, stupid. So busy running my mouth that I let the fight get too close to Lily and Heather." Okay, so now we're getting information from Cyberfrog that he was unaware of, and now he's aware of, and he's making us aware of. Can't blame the kid. She's been taught from birth to fear an insect boogeyman she's never seen until today. Of course she's going to lose it. And so that gives the reader some insight into Lily's emotional state. And it's an assumption on Cyberfrog's part, but it's a valid assumption. We don't have to question it. We can just basically say, yeah, that sounds pretty reasonable, and then move on. So now Cyberfrog has been stung, and the Vespis is flying away. And it is flying away without its stinger. Now, I did not know that at first when I was looking at this page, because one of the things I know about Earth Hornet anatomy is that Earth Hornets have straight stingers. And what that means is they don't leave their stinger in their prey. So the Vespis are different from Earth Hornets in that way. The Vespis actually leaves the stinger in its prey and then flies off and does what it needs to do. Generally speaking, on Earth, the bees are what leave their stingers in their prey, because the stinger at the end of a bee is hooked. And so when the stinger goes in and then the bee tries to fly away, the bee actually rips itself apart, flying away from the site of the sting. And then the bee flies off and dies from the trauma. And the stinger remains in the prey. But for a hornet, the stinger is straight. And so the stinger can be used again and again and again, and there's no reason, if the Vespis were like an Earth Hornet, why the stinger would detach in Cyberfrog. So this is something that kind of needs to be made known to the reader, because otherwise, like me, I'm looking at this thinking, well, I can't see the stinger, but it's probably just occluded by something. It's probably just bent so I can't see it. But I'm assuming that it's still there because I know hornet anatomy on Earth. Moreover, you've got this, ouch, okay, that stings. And that's not even taking the gravity of the situation into account. Cyberfrog has just been stung by a Vespis. He's just been stung by the same thing that caused a man to explode. Is he going to explode? I mean, to his knowledge, he's dead at this point. And he should be aware of that, and he should express the gravity of the situation. And now I'm dead. Stinger detached in me. It's job done. So now we have the gravity of the situation. We also have the fact that the Stinger detached in him, which is, not something that would be typical for a Earth Hornet, but we now know is typical for the Vespas. Venom's working. Feels like fire. Swelling. Right arm's dead. Okay, there's two problems here, one of which was there before, one of which I just introduced. You don't generally stutter in your thoughts, so we're going to get rid of that stutter. And then for right arm's dead, since I used the word dead in the first panel, I'm going to change that to numb in the third panel. So feels like fire, swelling, right arm's numb. Now he lashes his tongue out and captures the Vespas, saying, "You ain't going anywhere." But, why? Why does it matter? Because at this point, we're focused on the fact that he's dying. We need to be reminded of why it is important that this Vespas not be allowed to leave. So let's change that dialogue to, "Can't let the bug report back." I'm not going to comment on this sequence of panels much, other than to say this is a very, very low energy sequence. This and the couple of panels that follow are way low in energy for the climax of a fight. I mean, the Vespas actually gets, all tied up in the tongue-tied, if you want to call it, but it's tied up in Cyberfrog's tongue, and then Cyberfrog lets go with his tongue, and the Vespas is just lying there? I don't understand why it's just lying there. Why is there no fight left in this bug? I'm expecting a more climactic confrontation than what I'm getting here. In fact, what I was thinking was that maybe when Cyberfrog got it with his tongue, he would then whip his head around, and then the bug would slam into a tree, breaking its chitin, and then he could jam that stinger into the opening that was made in the chitin, and then that would be what kills the bug. But the way that it's done here, where he's just, it's like he's just barely doing anything and trying to kill it, and it's just lying there, and now he's going to pull its head off. And even pulling its head off is so low energy. And I know he's weakened, but in most superhero stuff, you have that trope of, here is that last heroic effort before the hero is just about ready to collapse. And you don't get that here. You just get this kind of pop, splort, and done. And I'm just saying this feels like a very, very anticlimactic end to the fight. Now we have an epilogue where the head of the Murder Hornet is still buzzing and won't stop, and so Cyberfrog loses his temper and says, "Shut up!" and kicks it a long distance, while it's still buzzing, which is probably telegraphing the later plot way, way too much. This is like Black Panther levels of predictability. Black Panther was a decent movie, but man, that movie was predictable. And this feels like that, because I'm thinking, and maybe this doesn't happen in the book, I have not looked ahead to see what actually happens, but if that head is still buzzing even while it's in the air, that means it's still alive even while it's in the air. And so it's going to be buzzing on the ground, and it's going to be giving off a signal on the ground. And that means its compatriots, the other Murder Hornets, are going to be able to find it on the ground, and he's going to tell people that, hey, I found some humans and a big mutant frog over this way. And so that's going to lead the Vespas right to the survivalist camp. I mean, you could all just kind of see it rolling out in front of you, and the easiest way to stop from telegraphing all that information in advance is just to get rid of that sound. Let the kick have, silenced the Vespas, or at least temporarily, because we don't see what happens to it after this point. But he kicks it into the air, it stops making the noise, And so we can think, oh, okay, that thing's finally dead. We don't have to worry about it anymore. Although, maybe we do, and we just don't know that yet, because we haven't seen it already still giving off a signal while it's in the air. So, to avoid telegraphing what the later pages may hold, get rid of that, the Vespers buzzing while it's in midair. The last portion deals with Cyberfrog finding out that even though he is offline, he still has enough processing in his cybernetic, his own cybernetics to be able to stave off the effects of the venom, and so he's functionally immune. And then we get another money-stealing shot. I'm getting fleeced again because we have this big picture of Cyberfrog standing over the corpse of a Vespers, and the whole message is basically, see, nothing to worry about, because I beat the thing, which we already knew. And there's no new information here. So what kind of information can we insert here? Yes, just like before, we have plenty of room to actually get into Cyberfrog's head and get a little interesting information before we leave the scene. Something like, Heather offers a weak smile and a nod, but her attention is focused on Lily. Poor kid is still shaking as her mom guides her back toward wherever they live, I guess. Just before I start to follow them, it hits me. Heather isn't the teenager I knew anymore. She's a woman, a mother. Maybe I'll end up living near her, but I won't be home. Not like before. My home is gone. And on that sad note, which I wish had been in there, that is the end of Cyberfrog 2 Rekt Panels Part 2. Thank you very much for taking this 10-page journey with me through Cyberfrog Rekt Planet. I'm going to be pausing in my analysis of Cyberfrog 2 Rekt Planet for a while, because I just found out recently that Andy Smith is going to soon be releasing the campaign for Kordrath, The Awakening, and I actually own Kordrath, The Reckoning, but I haven't read it yet, which means I need to, because I need to see whether or not I'm going to be buying the sequel. So I am going to switch gears after this and move over to Kordrath, The Reckoning, and check that out. Now, I already have, by the way, a video analyzing the 8-page preview for Kordrath, The Reckoning. So if you want to get a preview of what I will likely be talking about if I do decide that I'm going to be critiquing that book, then please do check that out. You'll get a preview up front of what I'll say. In fact, I'm thinking that maybe I can even splice the contents of that video into the analysis video that I might do of Kordrath, The Reckoning overall. So anyway, that's just to let you know that I don't plan on having Cyberfrog 2 Rekt Panels Part 3 as my next video. I do need to catch up on Kordrath, The Reckoning to see whether or not I'm going to be buying Kordrath, The Awakening. So do bear with me on that. Otherwise, I want to say thanks again. Please do subscribe if you haven't already so that you can be notified whenever I do get back around to Rekt Planet, or if you're interested in seeing what I have to say about Kordrath, you'll get notified on that. And if I happen to, cut loose about any other subject in the meantime, then you'll get notifications on that as well. So please do subscribe, and thank you very much for watching. I'm Mike Bartica. You all have a good day, and I will talk to you later.